Well, Paris is the fashion capital of the world, and a new fashion week kicks off today here in the French capital with first the menswear collections, followed by the glamorous and hotly anticipated women's haute couture next week. Couture Week in Paris is always about the crème de la crème of fashion, made by iconic fashion houses from all over the world. But if you are not exactly model thin, you might have a hard time seeing yourself represented by the usual runway models wearing all those beautiful clothes. There was actually a peak in plus size models a few years ago, but their numbers have been decreasing ever since. We're going to talk a bit more about all of this now with Erin Zhurkin, the author of Plus Size in Paris, who joins me now live. Erin, welcome. Always great to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much.
Paris Fashion Week, of course, has pretty consistently always had a few plus size models, say about 30 to 40 or about 1% of the total looks over the past few years.
Mhm.
How are you thinking
Right.
this Paris Fashion Week is going to be? Are you hopeful that there'll be more plus size models?
Well, I know what I can kind of know will happen as we know from before, right? So we know that Christian Siriano will always have a wonderful runway full of all body types and body sizes. I think Esther Manez will as well. I'm not sure about the other ones, Jeannie. I don't have a lot of hope right now. I feel like it's really going on a downward trend for the other major fashion houses.
And
So it's kind of disappointing.
a downward trend from something that had peaked, some might say, a few years ago,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I think it's because they were getting a lot of pushback from, influencers, because influencers are kind of at the peak of saying we want more, we want better designs for ourselves. We want to be able to show, who we are in a more elegant way than what we were seeing, at the stores we're going to. So I think there was kind of a trend towards that, and I think it's kind of moving off a little bit, except for those ones that are still doing it, and that's actually kind of a commitment to their values, right? That's something that they're just going to always do because they believe that's important to
Mm.
represent all body sizes. So that's the difference, I think.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. It's interesting that it seems to really come down to the designers because when you look at the numbers, for example, from last year, it seems that things
Hmm.
kind of seem to depend on the city. So, for example, I was mentioning in Paris, around 40 plus size
Hmm.
models last September. In London, there were
Right.
twice that many. There were 80. But in Milan,
Hmm.
there were just 13. Is that just because of the designers or why the difference?
Oh, I think it has to do with location a little bit there, just because, I've lived in Paris and, I wrote a whole book about my experience there. I've lived in the UK as well. I have not lived in Milan or in Italy, but I've been there many times and visited. And I can tell you that in the UK, there is a more accessible feeling there to get plus size clothing that you want to get. I would say from all levels as well. But I'm not saying they're perfect. There's still a lot of work to do everywhere, but I did feel it was more accessible to me.
Mm.
In Milan and Italy, when I went there, it was a hard time. I couldn't find much, and a friend of mine who's Italian said to me once, she's like, "We don't care what body size you are. You just probably not gonna be able to shop here." So I was like, okay, well, that doesn't really help, does it?
And what
So,
about, and so Erin, this week in Paris is haute couture. I mean,
yeah,
very inaccessible for
yes.
many women. I mean, do we see a difference between haute couture and ready to wear with the types of models we see on the catwalks?
I think so. Personally, I do. I mean, whatever I'm watching it, and I love to watch. That's my favorite show, actually, is Haute Couture, and I just see a totally different, drastic feeling when I'm watching the different shows from Ready
Mm.
to Wear to Haute Couture. So definitely, yeah, I think
So,
it's
so,
different.
so, so not a lot of inclusivity in haute couture for the moment. What
I
about,
don't think so.
what
But
about
I will say one thing. Sorry, real quick. I want to say one thing. When you look at like the award shows again, those designers that are dressing celebrities that are plus size, those have a really huge impact too, right? To how we see ourselves and the possibilities that we might be able to be in those beautiful gowns too in some way. Not that we would, but we want to be able to see that we feel that we could,
Hmm.
be there. So yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, Erin, what about men's fashion? I mean, the menswear fashion shows start today in Paris. What's the situation like for men's plus size models? I mean, we don't hear so much about them.
Well, from my understanding, it's quite dismal. I mean, there's like one or two again, and one gentleman that I know that I follow actually on Instagram, James Corbin in the UK, and he was sought after and cast, and he's so lovely. He did an interview about his experience of becoming a men's plus size model, and he himself said, there needs to be more. Why am I the only one?
Mm.
There needs to be many more men on the runway being represented with all different body sizes again. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So your book, Erin, that you wrote, Plus Size in Paris, you actually
Hmm.
dedicated it to plus size fashion influencers you were mentioning a few moments ago. Tell us a bit more about what kind of role they've played in moving the needle on plus size fashion.
Oh, they've done so much. I mean, I feel like that they really have done the majority of the heavy lifting of this movement. I mean, there's no way any of this is happening without influencers putting themselves out there every single day, um, you know dressing in front of the camera, showing people what's possible, putting styles together, putting looks together where women can just go and click on it and buy it and put it on themselves and go out and feel great that day. They've been huge part of it. It doesn't happen without them. I really believe that.
So
So
just to wrap up, Erin, what should plus size fashion lovers do? I mean, is it better to support high end designers you were mentioning earlier, who perhaps are showing more representation? Is it better to not support those who aren't showing representation, or is it just better to demand that designers do better?
I think it has to be a demand. I do. I think it has to be, again, using those influencers, using the ability we have now to reach globally, anyone we want, to say, we deserve more. Body sizes are all different, and there should not be any kind of exclusivity feeling about what I can wear and what someone else can wear, just because my body size. Like, there needs to be definitely a pushback on that. It can happen because they are doing it. It's happening. We see it, come out on runways once in a while. So it is possible to do it. They're just not doing it across the board, and there's no reason for that.
All
You think
right.
about the collections having 4,300 different looks, right? And we're only seeing 30 plus size models. That's a really low percentage.
It
So,
certainly is. Erin,
see.
thanks so much for weighing in on all of this for us. Erin Zhurkin, the
Thank you
author
for
of
having me.
Plus Size in Paris, talking there about plus size models and the very few plus size models there are again today as this Paris Fashion Week gets underway.